We are now less than 48 hours away from the trade deadline, and historically speaking, this is when things really start ramping up in terms of rumors, trade talks, and actually trades being executed upon. It's going to be a whirlwind over the next 48 hours around the league, but will anything actually happen for the Chicago Bulls? And last night, after my kids went to bed and with no Bulls game on, as one does when you're a basketball sicko like myself, I played around with the trade machine as we near closer to the deadline to see what potential trades could be possible for the Bulls. And while I wasn't focusing on Zach Lavine when looking at fake trades initially, because I think we've all accepted the reality that with Zach Lavine's injury, he's more than likely not going to get moved before the deadline, because what team is going to want a player who is out for the rest of the season on a max contract? But as I got to thinking about it more and more, there are two teams, and really just two teams, for which could still make a play at Zach Lavine and where it would make sense for them to pursue. What teams are they, you might ask? Well, let's talk about it. But first, a quick word from the sponsor of today's video. If you haven't heard of Underdog Fantasy, let me tell you about their platform real quick, because I absolutely love this app as it's super easy to use. And if you're like me and you like making predictions, maybe you want to win a little money on the side, then this is it. My personal favorite that I use on the app is NBA Pick'ems. They have higher or lowers on most player stats for any game. Just pick higher or lower on a given player's stat for their upcoming game, and you can win up to 20 times your money in a single night if you do 5 pick'ems and you get them all right. And guys, they're offering viewers of this channel an exclusive offer. If you use the promo code BullsCentral, you'll get your first deposit doubled up to $100. Who doesn't want free money, right? It's really that easy. It's also a great way to help support the channel. I'll leave a link to the site and the code in the description if you're interested, and let me know what picks you guys end up making. Now, when it comes to potential trade suitors for Zach Lavine, in light of him being out for the season, this is really going to boil down to a team in which it won't matter to them if he plays or not this season, but would benefit from having a player like him coming back healthy next season. You're talking about teams who are very bad right now. They're not playing for anything, but more so playing for lottery balls. And they're teams that really, despite having cap space, aren't going to be the types of teams that are going to garner a lot of interest from free agents because of their long history of losing. Like, as much as teams like the Warriors, the Lakers, hell, even the Mavs or the Magic made sense for pursuing Zach Lavine and actually having the requisite salary pieces to make a deal work, the fact of the matter is those teams would have only been interested in Zach if it meant he could help their team win now for this season. As such, those teams are out on Zach Lavine. They have no reason to pursue him at this point in a trade. However, the bottom feeders of the world, those teams who have no shot at the playoffs at this point and are in need of a bigger name and a player who is already established and an offensive weapon going into next season to hopefully turn their fortunes around, could be interested in Zach Lavine. It's probably wishful thinking on my part and my desperate attempt to see how the Bulls could still trade Zach before the deadline, but those two teams are the Detroit Pistons and the Charlotte Hornets. And more specifically, the Hornets, I feel, make way more sense in pursuing Zach Lavine. But I'll start with the Pistons for now. So we know that the Bulls and the Pistons did have some preliminary conversations around a trade centered around Zach Lavine. The Bulls wanted one of their 4 young core players in Cunningham, Jalen Duren, Jaden Ivey, or Asur Thompson. The Pistons said, yeah, no thanks, that's not happening. And from what's been reported, talks ceased from there, especially now that Zach is out for the season, which exasperated their concerns around Zach's long-term health. But regardless, I still feel like a trade for the Pistons and getting Lavine makes sense for them. Obviously, at this point, the Bulls aren't going to be getting any valuable assets in return. They need to just accept that reality. But when I look at a team like the Pistons, the worst team in the league, 6 wins all season, they have a lot of young talent in the form of their 4 young players that I just mentioned, but they need more veteran players, more scorers on their team to get them out of this perpetual state of losing. Not that Zach is suddenly going to make them a playoff team next season, but good enough with the help of another top lottery pick that they're going to get in this year's draft, might even be the #1 pick since they have the highest odds to get that, where they finally get themselves out of being the doormat of the Eastern Conference, and maybe, just maybe, with Cade Cunningham being the centerpiece and their younger core developing further, and with Zach being a primary scoring option on most nights, they could maybe get to a place where they can start making a little noise as an up-and-coming team for the future, and they can start building their franchise from there. And so what would a trade look like? Well, for the Bulls, this would be a matter of salary dumping. I know a lot of Bulls fans don't like hearing that and think that it would make more sense to just keep Lavine, but if you caught my last video and talking about the Bulls salary cap situation going into next season, it actually would behoove them to try and get off Lavine's contract if possible. So in this instance, you would have a trade package that would send Zach to Detroit in exchange for Bojan Bogdanovic and Joe Harris. Bogdanovic and Harris are not part of the Pistons' future plans. And if anything, you could argue that Bogdanovic will actually give them a few extra wins they probably don't want at this point. And so for the Bulls, the benefit here are the expiring contracts. Bogdanovic has 2 years left on his deal, but next season isn't guaranteed, so the Bulls could get him off the books if they wanted to. Bogdanović and to some extent Joe Harris, even though he's been pretty bad this season, has barely played. But both of these guys are good shooters, something the Bulls could use coming off the bench. Or, even in the case of Bojan Bogdanović, start for the Bulls with Patrick Williams being out for an extended period of time. And then for the Pistons, I feel like a duo of Zach and Cade Cunningham, especially if Zach can come back healthy and return to form, would actually be a fun and exciting backcourt and draw some interest around the league with their other pieces in Duren, Ivey, and Thompson. But the team I think makes the most sense in a pursuit for Zach Lavine is the Charlotte Hornets. Look, the Hornets are bad. They've been bad for a while. They've been desperately trying to make plays at guys to bring in bigger names and try to be relevant, like when they handed out that fat contract to Gordon Hayward, or years before that, Nicholas Batum. It's so hard for them to attract free agents because they're in a small market and don't have a history of winning. They've won all but 10 games this season. They've got this great franchise-level player in LaMelo Ball, who they know is likely going to grow frustrated and want out at some point if they don't get their act together. They've got a solid rookie with a lot of potential in Brandon Miller, who they took number 2 overall in the draft. What the Hornets are missing is a strong offensive player to put alongside LaMelo Ball and finally get out of this perpetual state of losing. And so by trading for Zach Lavine, they obviously don't get him this season, which isn't a problem for them because they should be trying to lose as many games as possible from here on out. And similar to the situation with the Detroit Pistons, secure another high lottery pick. Have Zach come back healthy next season with a core of LaMelo, Brandon Miller, Zach, and then also whoever they end up selecting in this upcoming draft, which is going to be a high lottery pick. And they finally start looking like a fun franchise that could turn some heads. Now, I initially put this trade together in which the Hornets would send the Bulls Gordon Hayward, James Bouknight, and a first-round pick for Zach, but I feel like it's a bit unrealistic at this point to expect a first-round pick in return in a deal for Zach Lavine. Maybe instead of that 2026 pick, they could have them ship that first-round pick they just acquired from the Heat in the Terry Rozier deal, which isn't as valuable because it's likely going to be a mid to late first-rounder since the Heat are always in the hunt. But even if you remove the pick entirely, getting Gordon Hayward, who is purely for salary matching purposes and an expiring contract to free up cap space going forward, and then taking kind of a flyer on James Bouknight, although I don't really see Bouknight producing anything into something special. Maybe a new environment will do well for him, but a former lottery pick who's only 23, it's a low-risk scenario for a player who could end up becoming a decent role player over time with the right development. Again, I know none of this is ideal. We're talking about dumping a former All-Star for essentially nothing in return aside from freeing up cap space for the future, which is never something we would have imagined in finding ourselves in this position when talking about a trade for Zach Lavine. But the reality is, that's the unfortunate circumstance for how this season has transpired in the trade market for Zach. At the end of the day, do I think either of these trades are going to happen? No. I don't think the Bulls are going to be able to move Zach before the deadline, and you're probably looking at a scenario in which he's moved in the offseason once he starts showing some signs of recovery to other teams. But it's wishful thinking to see if maybe we can get the Bulls to swing a deal here in the next 48 hours. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.